Okay, I want you to picture a scenario for me.
I'm listening.
It's, say, a Tuesday morning. Crisp air, sun is out. You're walking down a busy street, maybe heading to work or just clearing your head.
Yep.
You pass that trendy coffee shop on the corner, the one, exposed brick, the overpriced lattes, it's always
I
packed.
know the one.
Now, here is the really specific part of this. You do not have your smartphone on you.
Oh, a rare occurrence.
Right. Maybe you left it charging on the kitchen counter, or you're just, doing a digital detox. You are not connected to their Wi-Fi. You haven't logged into anything. You feel completely off the grid.
It sounds like a relief, honestly, that rare moment where you aren't just another data point, you're just a person on the street.
That is exactly what you feel like. Invisible. But, and here's where we have to shatter that illusion. According to the research we're unpacking today, in that exact moment, as you walked past that window, you were identified. And I don't mean the barista waved at you. I mean the network itself. The invisible Wi-Fi signals in the air identified you with nearly 100% accuracy.
And that right there, that is the hook for today's deep dive. We're looking at a report that, it honestly reads like a cyberpunk thriller.
It really does.
But it comes from a very reputable source, the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, or KIT. Specifically, their Castell Institute of Information Security and Dependability.
The headline is basically, Wi-Fi could become an invisible mass surveillance system. And the thing that really stuck with me, and we have to stress this right at the top, this has nothing to do with the phone in your pocket.
That is the critical distinction. Usually when we talk surveillance, we're talking about tracking a device, right?
Right, a MAC address, a GPS ping, a login.
Exactly. If you want to disappear, you ditch the device. But this research just flips that entirely. Professor Thorsten Struve, who led this team, he puts it very bluntly. He says, and I'm quoting, "It does not matter whether you carry a Wi-Fi device on you or not."
Which is terrifying, but also fascinating from a physics standpoint. So our mission today is to understand how this is even possible. How does our router turn into a camera?
And why are people in the industry, freaking out about this right now? It really requires a shift in how we think about the space around us.
Okay.
We tend to think of Wi-Fi as like invisible data cables connecting our devices to the internet. But you have to stop thinking of it as data. You have to start thinking of it as light.
Okay, let's play with that analogy. Because physically, radio waves and light, they're both electromagnetic radiation, just at different frequencies, right?
Exactly. Imagine you're in a pitch black room and you turn on a single light bulb. That bulb is the router.
Okay.
Now, if you walk through that room, your body interacts with the light. You block some of it, you cast a shadow, you reflect some of it off your clothes, your skin. Even if you're not holding a flashlight yourself, your physical presence changes the illumination of the entire room.
So in this scenario, the Wi-Fi router is the light bulb, and my body is casting a radio shadow as I walk by.
Precisely. Radio waves propagate through space. When they hit your body, they bounce, they deflect, they absorb. They create this incredibly complex pattern of interference. And Professor Struve explains that these patterns can be captured and analyzed to create what is effectively an image.
So not a photo, but...
Not a photograph in the visual sense, no. But it's a distinct biometric signature that is comparable to a camera image.
But here's where I get a little stuck on the technical side. A light bulb just shines. It doesn't know where the shadows are unless you have an eye or, a camera lens to see them. A router doesn't have a retina. How is it seeing the disturbance I'm causing?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is in this specific mechanism called beamforming feedback information, or BFI.
BFI. Okay, let's break this down because this seems to be the smoking gun.
It is. So to understand BFI, you have to know that modern Wi-Fi has gotten really smart. Old routers just, blasted the signal out in a circle, like a radio station. But modern Wi-Fi uses something called beamforming. It tries to steer the signal directly toward the devices that need it, your laptop, your TV, your phone.
It's like a spotlight instead of a floodlight to get better speeds.
Correct. But to aim that spotlight, the router needs to know where things are. So the connected devices, the laptop, the phone, they're constantly sending back these little status reports. They're saying, hey, the signal is strong here, or it's getting weak, adjust the beam. That feedback loop, that is the beamforming feedback information.
Okay, so that's just standard network traffic. It's the devices talking to the router to keep Netflix running smoothly. Where is the security hole?
The hole is that this BFI signal, this feedback report, is currently transmitted completely without encryption.
Wait, what?
It is effectively being shouted across the room in plain text.
So the router's shouting, "Where are you?" And the devices are shouting back, "I'm over here." And anyone can just listen to that conversation.
Anyone with a standard Wi-Fi receiver. And here's the trick. The researchers realized that by passively listening to this unencrypted feedback, they could analyze how the waves were bouncing all around the room. And since your body affects those bounces, remember our shadow analogy, the feedback creates a really detailed map of the environment, including the people moving through it.
So just to be crystal clear, the camera isn't a lens on the router. The camera is the analysis of the echoes bouncing off my body while the router is just talking to some other device.
That is a perfect summary. And the researchers, they emphasize this doesn't require specialized spy gear. We aren't talking military-grade LiDAR or expensive radar.
Right.
This uses standard, off-the-shelf Wi-Fi hardware, the kind you'd find in almost every home, office, and coffee shop.
Which brings us to the deep dive stress test. Usually when I hear about Wi-Fi sensing, I think of like motion detectors. My security system knows someone is in the hallway, but it doesn't know who. Is this just fancy motion detection, or is it actual identification?
That's exactly what the Castell team wanted to find out. They moved way beyond simple motion detection. They ran a controlled experiment with 197 participants.
Which is a pretty robust sample size for training a machine learning model.
It is, yeah. They gathered all this BFI data as these people moved through the Wi-Fi field, and the result was startling. They could infer the identity of those specific individuals with nearly 100% accuracy.
100%. That sounds impossibly high for something as messy as radio waves.
It does, but the data is incredibly rich. I mean, the system analyzes your gait, the specific way you walk, your body shape, your cross-section. It even worked independently of the perspective.
And it's fast.
Oh, yeah. Speed is a major factor. Once the model is trained, the identification happens in just a few seconds.
So going back to our intro scenario, I walk past the coffee shop. The router inside is talking to a laptop at table 3. My body interrupts that signal. The system reads the interruption, and before I've even taken 3 steps, it knows that's the host.
Exactly. And this brings up what Felix Morsbach, another one of the researchers, calls the infrastructure problem.
I think I can guess what that means. If you want to track people with facial recognition, you have to install cameras.
Right.
You have to wire them up. People see them. There's a physical act of installation.
Exactly. Cameras are visible infrastructure. You see the lens, you know you're being watched, and maybe you change your behavior. You pull up your hood, you look away. But Morsbach points out that wireless networks are, well, omnipresent.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere. And unlike a CCTV camera, a Wi-Fi router is invisible infrastructure. It raises no suspicion at all.
Julian Tott, another author on the paper, used a phrase that really sent a shiver down my spine. He called the router a quiet observer.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? It's just this passive, constant surveillance that you just can't opt out of. You can't just not use the Wi-Fi because the Wi-Fi is using you. And Tott explicitly warns that authorities or companies could identify you just by you passing a cafe.
Yeah.
You wouldn't notice it, you wouldn't consent, and you'd have no way of knowing it even happened.
Which, naturally, leads to the big question, why are they publishing this? I mean, if I found a way to turn every router in the world into a spy camera, I feel like I'd keep that quiet. Or sell it.
Well, thankfully, this is white hat research. The team at KID isn't trying to build a surveillance state. They're trying to prevent one. They're sounding the alarm because there's a very specific window of opportunity that is closing right now. It all has to do with international standards.
You're talking about the IE 802.1bF standard.
I am. I know. IE 802.1bF sounds like the most boring string of characters imaginable.
It really does.
But it is actually the battleground for the future of privacy.
So why is this specific standard so important?
Because 802.1bF is the forthcoming standard specifically for WLAN sensing. The industry wants Wi-Fi to be better at sensing.
For good reasons, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. They want your lights to turn on when you walk in the room, or your elderly parents' Wi-Fi to detect if they fall down.
Right.
That's the beneficial side.
Okay, that makes sense.
But what the researchers are saying is, look, if you standardize this technology without mandating encryption for that BFI feedback, you are accidentally codifying a mass surveillance tool into the global infrastructure. They are pleading with the standards body to close this loophole before it becomes the default setting for the next 10 years.
And they aren't just worried about hackers or, advertisers. They mention a very specific political risk.
Yes, the risk to authoritarian states. I mean, imagine a scenario where a government wants to identify protesters. Let's say there's a march down a main street. The protesters are smart. They leave their phones at home to avoid GPS tracking. They wear masks to beat facial recognition.
In a traditional sense, they've done everything right to protect their anonymity.
Everything right.
Yeah.
But if that street is lined with shops, and all those shops have standard Wi-Fi routers, the government doesn't need to see their faces. They can just harvest the BFI data. They can identify the radio shadows of the people marching. It renders the mask and the air-gapped phone completely useless.
That is a heavy realization. It takes this from a cool tech hack to a human rights issue very, very quickly.
It does. And when you look at how the public is reacting to this news, we spent some time combing through the comments on the article, you can really see people grappling with that shift.
Oh, the comments section. It was a fascinating mix of denial, technical bargaining, and just pure anxiety. It feels like people are trying to figure out how to play a game of cat and mouse with a cat they can't even see.
It really is a psychological case study. You see this immediate instinct for evasion. People aren't saying, let's pass a law. They're saying, how do I build a gadget to beat this?
Right, let's look at user Meow. They suggested carrying a low-power noise source on the 2.4 gigahertz band.
The jamming approach. The idea is to create like a 1-meter bubble of interference around you. If you flood the area with radio noise, the router can't get a clear read on your reflection. It's like throwing a smoke bomb.
But practically speaking, carrying a jammer is illegal in a lot of places, and it would also kill the internet for everyone around you.
True. It's the scorched earth policy of privacy.
Then you had user Land Seamstress, who I think was joking, but in this context, it's actually a valid physics question. They talked about sewing Faraday linings into their clothes.
The evolution of the tinfoil hat into the tinfoil tuxedo.
Exactly.
A Faraday cage creates a conductive mesh that blocks electromagnetic fields. So, in theory, if you wore a suit made of this material, the radio waves wouldn't penetrate or bounce off your body in that unique way. You'd be a walking dead zone.
But then user Wally jumped in with a counterpoint that I hadn't thought of, which I thought was brilliant.
Yes, Wally argues that if the system is looking for normal reflections and suddenly a black hole of data moves through the room, that's highly suspicious.
Right.
Being the only person who doesn't reflect radio waves might make you stand out more than if you just walk normally.
It's the invisible man problem. If you're invisible, you can still see the footprints in the snow. Wally suggested a frequency-hopping transistor radio to generate a decoy signal instead.
Which is incredibly sophisticated. But again, notice the trend. Everyone is assuming the infrastructure is hostile. There is a total collapse of trust.
And speaking of trust, there was a subset of comments that were, well, they were harder to read. I'm thinking of users like Ed and AJ.
Yes. And we need to handle this carefully. We aren't here to validate the scientific accuracy of their personal claims, but we have to acknowledge what their reaction represents.
Of course not. But it's about the feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Ed describes being broadcast to since 2020. He talks about hearing voices, feeling mind-hacked. And AJ describes active tracking by military agencies, mentioning lasers and remote technologies invading their privacy in the shower in intimate moments.
And these are clearly people who are experiencing deep distress. They feel hunted. And usually society dismisses that feeling as paranoia because the counter-argument is always, that's impossible. No one can watch you through your walls.
But then a team of top-tier scientists from KIT comes along and says, actually, we can watch you through your walls using the Wi-Fi.
It validates the anxiety. Whether or not Ed and AJ are experiencing exactly what the researchers describe, the existence of this technology just fuels that fire. It makes the fear rational.
It stops being a technical debate about bandwidth and becomes a mental health issue. It's about the feeling of safety in your own home.
And that connects to the skepticism we saw from user Tampa Dude. He called this FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. His argument was, why bother? The government already has credit card receipts and CCTV. Why use wobbly Wi-Fi signals when they have 4K video?
But user Wario had the answer to that.
Yeah, he did.
Oreo points out that the expansion is already a done deal. It's about coverage. CCTV isn't everywhere, but Xfinity Wi-Fi, Ring cameras, smart cars, home routers, they create a public domain surveillance network that covers all the blind spots.
And if the signal bleeds into the public domain, out onto the street, through the apartment wall, does it become public property?
That is the legal nightmare we're walking straight into.
So let's try to synthesize all of this.
Right.
We've covered the tech, the study, the fallout.
We have?
We've learned that standard Wi-Fi, the stuff sitting on your shelf right now, can identify you with near-perfect accuracy by analyzing the unencrypted feedback signals, the BFI.
And critically, this works without you holding a phone.
Yeah.
You are completely passive in this process.
The researchers at KIT are fighting to get the IE 802.1BF standard updated to force encryption, close this loophole, but the infrastructure is already out there.
And even if the standard changes for future devices, we have millions of legacy devices active right now. The capability is out of the bag.
It's a lot to process. It definitely changes how I'm going to look at that flashing green light on my router tonight.
It should. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question that this research really forces us to confront. We're used to debating who owns your data, your browsing history, your emails.
Yeah.
But this is different.
Now,
If your router is technically a camera that captures biometric images of everyone who walks by through walls, through curtains, who owns those images? Does that data belong to you, the person standing in your living room? Does it belong to the person paying the internet bill? Or does it belong to the ISP or tech company capable of reading the signal?
that is a question that I think the courts are going to be struggling with for a very long time. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious, stay safe, and maybe check your router settings.
Take care, everyone.